Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that sounds like a children's bedtime story, but would actually be your worst nightmare. We're diving into Wonderland, that whimsical realm of talking rabbits and tea parties that Lewis Carroll gifted to the world. But here's the thing, if you actually fell down that rabbit hole, you wouldn't be having a delightful adventure. You'd be dead before the Mad Hatter could pour his first cup of tea. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey through the most dangerous place in children's literature. Picture this. You're chasing a white rabbit through a forest when suddenly the ground gives way beneath your feet. You're tumbling down a hole so deep that you have time to wonder if you'll fall straight through the earth itself. But that's just the beginning of your problems. Because when you finally land in Wonderland, you've entered a realm where the very laws of physics, logic, and reality have been thrown out the window and replaced with something far more sinister. Most people think of Wonderland as a place of whimsy and imagination, colourful characters, nonsense poetry, and curious adventures. But strip away the children's book illustrations and you're left with something terrifying. A world where madness is the norm, where authority figures sentence you to death for the smallest infractions, and where your own body can betray you at any moment through violent, uncontrollable transformations. The truth is, Wonderland isn't a fantasy. It's a death trap disguised as a fairy tale. And tonight we're going to walk through exactly why you wouldn't survive even one night in this twisted realm. From the moment you fall down that rabbit hole to the second you try to close your eyes and rest, every single thing in Wonderland is designed to kill you. The creatures, the environment, the food, even the games they play for entertainment. It's all a carefully orchestrated symphony of danger. Let's start with your entrance into this nightmare. You've just followed a talking rabbit into what seems like a simple burrow. Already, this should be your first red flag. In the real world, chasing random animals into holes in the ground is exactly the kind of decision that gets you featured in a cautionary tale. But let's say curiosity gets the better of you. As it did Alice, you lean over the edge to get a better look, and gravity takes over. The fall itself should kill you. We're talking about a drop so deep that you have time to examine the walls around you, grab objects from shelves, and contemplate your situation. That's a fall measured in hundreds, possibly thousands of feet. In the real world, you'd hit terminal velocity and arrive at the bottom as nothing more than a very unpleasant stain on the ground. But Wonderland operates on dream logic, so somehow you survive, bruised, disoriented, and already questioning your sanity, but alive. Here's where the real horror begins. The moment you stand up and dust yourself off, you're no longer operating under the physical laws you've known your entire life. Gravity works differently here. Time moves in strange patterns. And your own body, the one thing you've always been able to count on, becomes your enemy. Within minutes of arriving, you encounter your first potentially fatal transformation. You discover a bottle labelled "Drink Me" and a cake marked "Eat Me." Now, in the real world, consuming unmarked substances found in strange places is a guaranteed way to end up in the morgue. But Wonderland doesn't give you a choice. The environment itself seems to compel you toward these decisions. The bottle calls to you. The cake beckons. And when you give in to temptation, your body begins changing in ways that would terrify any rational person. Imagine growing from your normal height to the size of a house in a matter of seconds. Your cardiovascular system, designed to pump blood through a body of a specific size, would immediately fail. Your heart couldn't generate enough pressure to push blood to your brain when you're suddenly 40 feet tall. You'd pass out from oxygen deprivation and collapse, crushing anything and anyone beneath you. That's assuming your bones and joints could even support the sudden weight increase, which they couldn't. But let's say the magic of Wonderland somehow keeps your giant body functional. Now you're trapped in a room that's become a prison. The ceiling presses against your head. The walls squeeze your shoulders. You can barely breathe as your massive lungs try to extract oxygen from the limited air in the space. Every movement threatens to bring the entire structure down on top of you. Then, just as panic sets in, you shrink. But this might be even worse. Dropping from 40 feet to 3 inches tall in seconds would be like experiencing the world's most violent roller coaster. Your inner ear, responsible for balance and spatial orientation, would be completely overwhelmed. You'd be vomiting, dizzy, and unable to stand. Meanwhile, your now tiny body would be losing heat at an alarming rate. Small animals have high surface area to volume ratios, which means they lose body heat quickly. You'd be hypothermic within minutes. And that's just the beginning of your size-changing nightmare. These transformations don't happen once or twice. They're constant, unpredictable, and violent. One moment you're giant, the next you're microscopic. Your body never has time to adapt. Your brain never adjusts to the new scale. You're trapped in a cycle of physical trauma that would break most people before the sun sets on their first day. But the physical transformations are just one layer of Wonderland's lethality. The real danger lies in the complete breakdown of logical reality. In our world, we depend on certain constants. Water flows downhill, fire burns, animals don't talk back when you address them. These aren't just conveniences, they're survival tools. They help us navigate our environment safely and make predictions about what will happen next. In Wonderland, all of those tools are useless. Water might flow upward, fire might freeze you instead of burning you. And animals don't just talk, they judge you, mock you, and actively work against your survival. This isn't just disorienting, it's psychologically devastating. Your brain, evolved over millions of years to recognize patterns and make predictions, is suddenly operating in an environment where pattern recognition is not just useless, but dangerous. Consider what happens when you can't trust your basic senses anymore. You see a cat that appears and disappears at will, leaving only its grin floating in mid-air. You encounter playing cards that walk and talk and live in constant terror of execution. You sit at a tea party where time has stopped and the participants are trapped in perpetual argument. These aren't just strange sights, they're attacks on your fundamental understanding of reality. The psychological stress alone would be enough to break most people. Imagine trying to sleep in a world where you can't predict what's real and what's illusion. Every shadow could be a disappearing cat. Every sound could be a playing card soldier marching towards you with orders for your execution. Every moment of rest could be the opportunity for your own body to betray you with another violent transformation. And then there are the residents of Wonderland themselves. At first glance, they might seem harmless. A rabbit obsessed with punctuality, a caterpillar smoking a hookah, a group of animals having tea. But look closer and you'll see that every single creature in this realm is operating on a level of madness that makes them fundamentally unpredictable and therefore dangerous. The white rabbit, your supposed guide into this world, is manic and aggressive when stressed. He's constantly in a state of panic, which means his decision-making is compromised. Following him is like following someone having a nervous breakdown through a minefield. He'll lead you into dangerous situations not out of malice, but out of his own psychological instability. The Cheshire Cat presents himself as helpful, offering directions and advice, but he openly admits that everyone in Wonderland is mad, including you. This means that any guidance you receive is coming from someone who is, by his own admission, insane. His tendency to appear and disappear without warning means that help could vanish at exactly the moment you need it most. You might find yourself relying on his directions only to discover he's led you directly into danger and then disappeared, leaving you to face the consequences alone. The Mad Hatter and March Hare trap visitors in endless, circular conversations that serve no purpose except to frustrate and confuse. But this isn't just annoying, it's psychologically torturous. They take pleasure in your confusion, deliberately misleading you and enjoying your distress. Spending time with them is like being subjected to a form of mental torture designed to break down your cognitive defenses. Every interaction in Wonderland follows this pattern. The creatures you meet aren't just eccentric or quirky, they're actively hostile to your well-being. They enjoy causing confusion, frustration, and fear. They operate on a level of casual cruelty that would be shocking in the real world, but is simply the norm in their twisted realm. And hovering over all of this chaos is the most dangerous resident of Wonderland, the Queen of Hearts. This isn't just an temperamental monarch. This is a sociopathic ruler whose favourite phrase is "off with their head," and who means it literally. She sentences people to death for the smallest infractions, playing croquet poorly, speaking out of turn, simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her justice system operates on the principle of sentence first, verdict afterwards, which means your guilt is predetermined regardless of any evidence. So, what makes the Queen of Hearts truly terrifying is her absolute authority. In Wonderland, her word is law, and her law is death. There's no appeal process, no higher authority to turn to, no escape from her arbitrary justice. Every resident of Wonderland lives in constant fear of her, which creates an atmosphere of terror that would be psychologically devastating for any visitor. The Queen's favourite game is croquet, but this isn't the gentle lawn game you might know. In Wonderland croquet, the balls are live hedgehogs, the mallets are flamingos, and the hoops are playing card soldiers. The equipment is alive and uncooperative. The hedgehogs scuttle away when you try to hit them. The flamingos crane their necks around to look at you instead of staying rigid like proper mallets. The soldiers bend and move when balls approach them. This might sound whimsical until you realise that failure to play well results in immediate execution. You're expected to succeed at a game where the equipment is designed to ensure your failure. It's a rigged system where the only possible outcome is death, dressed up as entertainment for the Queen's amusement. But even if you somehow manage to avoid the Queen's attention, to navigate the psychological torture of the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, to survive your body's violent transformations, you'd still face the fundamental problem of Wonderland itself. This is a realm where the very concept of survival has been corrupted. The food can poison you or transform you. The environment shifts without warning. The inhabitants are unreliable at best and actively malicious at worst. There's no safe place to rest, no trustworthy ally to depend on, no logical system you can use to predict and avoid danger. You're trapped in a waking nightmare where every choice could be your last, and every moment of peace is just a setup for the next catastrophe. This is why Wonderland is so much more terrifying than any traditional horror story. In a haunted house or a monster movie, you at least understand the rules. Ghosts behave in certain ways. Monsters have specific weaknesses. There are patterns you can learn and strategies you can employ. But Wonderland doesn't give you that luxury. The rules change without notice. The patterns are deliberately broken, and the strategies that work in one situation will fail catastrophically in the next. Consider the basic human need for sleep. In the real world, we close our eyes for 8 hours and trust that we'll wake up in the same body, in the same place, with the same understanding of reality. But in Wonderland, sleep becomes another form of Russian roulette. You can't predict what you'll wake up as, where you'll wake up, or if the world around you will still follow the same twisted rules it did when you closed your eyes. The caterpillar's mushroom represents perhaps the most insidious danger you'll face. This blue creature, perpetually smoking his hookah, offers you what seems like helpful advice. One side of his mushroom will make you grow, the other will make you shrink. But he doesn't tell you the dosage, doesn't explain the timing, and doesn't warn you about the consequences of getting it wrong. Eating too much of either side could kill you in ways that would make a medieval executioner wince. Grow too large too quickly, and your heart simply can't pump blood through a body that's suddenly the size of a cathedral. Your blood pressure would drop to nothing as your cardiovascular system tries desperately to fill vessels that have expanded beyond its capacity. You die of massive organ failure while still conscious, watching your own body shut down piece by piece. Shrink too small and the opposite happens. Your heart, still sized for a normal human, would be trying to pump blood through vessels designed for something the size of a mouse. Your blood pressure would skyrocket, your brain would hemorrhage, your organs would burst from the pressure, And all the while you'd be conscious and aware of what was happening, because the caterpillar never mentioned that the transformations would be anything but instantaneous. But let's say you somehow manage to find the perfect dosage. You nibble carefully, testing small amounts, trying to maintain a stable size. Even then, you're playing with forces you don't understand. The mushroom's effects aren't just physical, they're neurological. Each transformation scrambles your brain chemistry a little more. Your memory becomes unreliable. Your perception of time gets distorted. Your ability to make rational decisions deteriorates with every change. After a few hours of size shifting, you wouldn't just be physically exhausted, you'd be mentally broken. Your brain, designed to maintain a consistent sense of self, would start fragmenting under the constant assault of contradictory sensory input. You'd lose track of who you are, what size you're supposed to be, and eventually, why you're even trying to survive. Meanwhile, the residents of Wonderland would be watching your deterioration with the casual interest of children observing an ant farm. They've seen this before. They know how this story ends. Every human who stumbles into their realm follows the same trajectory. Confusion, fear, desperate attempts to understand the rules, gradual psychological breakdown, and finally, complete surrender to the madness. The Duchess's house offers another perfect example of Wonderland's casual lethality disguised as domestic normalcy. You might think you're finding shelter, a place to rest and gather your thoughts. Instead, you walk into a chemical weapons attack disguised as dinner preparation. The cook throws pepper everywhere with manic enthusiasm, creating a cloud of irritant so thick that everyone in the house is sneezing uncontrollably. But this isn't just uncomfortable, it's medically dangerous. Prolonged exposure to pepper dust can cause severe respiratory distress, chemical burns to your mucous membranes, and, in extreme cases, complete respiratory failure. You'd be gasping for breath while the cook continues her assault, throwing plates and kitchen implements with the same enthusiasm she applies to her seasoning. The Duchess herself represents another layer of psychological torture. She's holding what appears to be a baby, but the infant transforms into a pig before your eyes. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally. A human child becomes a farm animal while she discusses morality and proper behaviour. This isn't just surreal, it's a direct assault on your understanding of species, identity, and the permanence of living beings. When she casually tosses the pig that was once a baby toward you, you're forced to confront the possibility that transformation in Wonderland isn't limited to size. Identity itself is fluid here. That pig might have been a person moments ago. You might be a pig moments from now. The very concept of stable identity, crucial to human psychological health, disintegrates in the face of such casual metamorphosis. The trial of the Knave of Hearts showcases Wonderland's legal system in all its terrifying glory. You might think that as a visitor you'd be immune to their strange laws. You'd be wrong. The moment you set foot in this realm, you become subject to a justice system that operates on principles of predetermined guilt and arbitrary punishment. The courtroom is packed with creatures you've already encountered, each one potentially a witness against you for crimes you didn't know you'd committed. The King of Hearts acts as judge, but he's weak, confused, and easily dominated by his wife. The jurors are animals with no understanding of human law or justice. The White Rabbit reads charges that make no logical sense. And over it all looms the Queen, ready to sentence you to death before any evidence is presented. The trial process itself is designed to ensure conviction. Witnesses are intimidated into giving testimony that supports the prosecution. Evidence is ignored or twisted to fit predetermined conclusions. Even defending yourself becomes additional evidence of guilt. When Alice tries to point out the absurdity of the proceedings, she's charged with being more than a mile high and growing at an alarming pace, both of which are somehow treated as criminal offences. This isn't just a corrupt legal system, it's a deliberate trap. Every visitor to Wonderland will eventually find themselves in this courtroom, facing charges they can't understand for crimes they didn't commit, defended by no one and judged by creatures who have already decided their fate. The trial is pure theatre, a cruel performance designed to give the illusion of justice while guaranteeing the outcome the Queen desires. But perhaps the most insidious danger in Wonderland is its effect on time itself. The Mad Hatter's Tea Party exists in a perpetual present, trapped at 6 o'clock forever. Time doesn't move forward because, as the Hatter explains, he quarrelled with time, and now time won't do anything for him. This might sound like a minor inconvenience until you realise what it means for human survival. Your body operates on circadian rhythms that depend on the passage of time. Your metabolism, your sleep cycles, your hormone production, all of it relies on time moving forward in a predictable pattern. Trap yourself in a temporal loop and your biology begins to break down. Your body doesn't know when to sleep, when to wake, when to produce the chemicals it needs to function. The psychological effects are even worse. Humans need a sense of progression, of moving forward through time toward goals and destinations. Remove that sense of forward motion and the mind begins to fragment. The Mad Hatter and March Hare aren't just eccentric, they're the products of prolonged exposure to temporal distortion. Their constant arguments, their circular conversations, their inability to focus on any topic for more than a few moments. These are symptoms of minds broken by endless repetition. Join their tea party and you become trapped in the same loop. 6 o'clock forever, the same conversations repeated endlessly. The same riddles with no answers, the same accusations and counter-accusations spiralling into infinity. Your sense of self would erode as you lose track of how long you've been sitting at that table, how many times you've heard the same jokes, how many cups of tea you've pretended to drink from empty pots. Even the physical environment of Wonderland seems designed to disorient and endanger visitors. The pool of tears that Alice creates through her size-changing emotional distress becomes a literal drowning hazard. Her own emotions, magnified by the transformations she's undergone, create environmental dangers that threaten her life. The landscape itself responds to the psychological state of its inhabitants, creating a feedback loop where fear and confusion generate actual physical threats. Objects in Wonderland can have magical properties that activate without warning. Fans can cause you to shrink to dangerous sizes. Gloves can trigger transformations. Even seemingly innocent items like playing cards can come alive and potentially attack you. The environment offers no safe objects, no neutral tools, no items you can touch without risking your life or sanity. The very air in Wonderland seems contaminated with madness. Every breath you take pulls the realm's insanity deeper into your lungs, your bloodstream, your brain. The residents aren't just mad because of their experiences. They're mad because madness is literally in the atmosphere. It's infectious, progressive, and inescapable. The longer you stay, the more you become like them, until eventually you can't remember why you ever wanted to leave. This is the true horror of Wonderland. It doesn't just threaten to kill your body, it threatens to erase your mind, your identity, your very sense of self. It offers a fate worse than death. The complete dissolution of everything that makes you human, replaced by the gibbering madness that passes for consciousness in this twisted realm. And through it all, the residents watch and laugh and continue their endless games, secure in the knowledge that madness loves company, and that every visitor who stumbles down that rabbit hole will eventually join their ranks. Not as a fellow traveller or welcome guest, but as another broken soul trapped forever in Wonderland's beautiful, terrible embrace. The escape routes that exist in other nightmare scenarios simply don't apply here. You can't wake up because you're not asleep. You can't run because there's nowhere to run to. You can't fight because the enemies are concepts rather than creatures. You can't negotiate because the rules change faster than you can learn them. You're trapped in a realm that operates on dream logic but offers no possibility of waking up. Aching up. So you try to find patterns, something you can hold on to, some rule that stays consistent long enough for you to build a strategy around it. But Wonderland's cruelest joke is that it gives you just enough consistency to build hope, then shatters that hope the moment you start to depend on it. The white roses in the Queen's garden are always white until they're painted red by terrified gardeners who know their lives depend on the colour of flowers. The Cheshire Cat always grins until the moment you need his smile to guide you through the darkness. This isn't random chaos, which would at least be honest. This is deliberate psychological warfare disguised as whimsy. The realm seems to study your coping mechanisms, learn what gives you comfort, then systematically destroy those sources of stability. You start to recognize the Mock Turtle's melancholy song, thinking you've found something constant, only to discover that each verse leads to a different emotional breakdown. Each chorus pulls you deeper into despair. The educational system referenced throughout Wonderland reveals another layer of insidious danger. The Griffin speaks excitedly about lessons in reeling and writhing, ambition, distraction, uglification, and derision. These aren't real subjects, they're deliberate corruptions of reading, writing, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. But they're presented with such enthusiasm, such apparent expertise, that you begin to doubt your own knowledge. This is gaslighting on a cosmic scale. Everything you learned in school, every fact you thought you could trust, becomes suspect when creatures speak with absolute authority about subjects that don't exist. Your education, the foundation of your ability to understand and navigate the world, crumbles beneath the weight of confident nonsense delivered with academic precision. The lobster quadrille dance that the Mock Turtle describes with such fondness becomes another trap for your sanity. It's a dance where sea creatures form lines on a beach, partner with lobsters, throw the lobsters out to sea, then swim after them. The description is delivered with nostalgic warmth, as if this violent, nonsensical activity represents the height of cultural achievement. When creatures speak lovingly about activities that would be considered animal cruelty in the real world, when they describe chaos as order and violence as entertainment, your moral compass begins to spin wildly. You lose the ability to distinguish between right and wrong because the very concepts have been inverted, corrupted, and redefined beyond recognition. The caucus race epitomizes Wonderland's approach to competition and achievement. Everyone runs in a circle, starting and stopping whenever they please, and at the end, everyone wins and everyone must have prizes. This sounds egalitarian until you realize what it means for human motivation and progress. In a world where effort has no relationship to outcome, where achievement is divorced from accomplishment, the very concepts that drive human behavior become meaningless. Your brain, evolved to find patterns and work toward goals, begins to shut down when presented with a system where patterns don't exist and goals are irrelevant. The satisfaction of completing a task, the pride of earning a reward, the motivation that comes from seeing progress, all of it evaporates in the face of arbitrary outcomes and meaningless victories. The violent playing card soldiers add another dimension to Wonderland's dangers. These aren't just animate objects, they're representatives of absolute authority, backed by the constant threat of execution. They march through the realm carrying out the Queen's orders with mechanical precision, but their very existence as living playing cards undermines the reality of everything around them. When you see soldiers made of cardboard carrying out real executions, when you watch them paint roses to avoid death, when they bow and scrape before a ruler who sentences people to death over garden maintenance, you're witnessing the complete breakdown of any rational relationship between authority and justice. Power exists for its own sake, backed by violence that's both absurd and absolutely real. The constant fear that permeates every interaction in Wonderland would be psychologically devastating, even if you were never directly threatened. Living in an atmosphere where every conversation could lead to a death sentence, where every game could end in execution, where every mistake could be your last, creates a level of stress that would destroy your immune system, your ability to think clearly, and your capacity for making rational decisions. Chronic stress of this magnitude doesn't just make you uncomfortable, it literally rewires your brain. Your amygdala, the fear center, becomes hyperactive while your prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thought, begins to shut down. You become increasingly paranoid, increasingly irrational, increasingly unable to distinguish between real threats and imaginary ones. In other words, you become exactly like the residents of Wonderland. The food in Wonderland represents perhaps the most insidious trap of all. Not just the transformation-inducing mushrooms or mysterious bottles, but everyday sustenance that follows no earthly logic. At the Mad Hatter's tea party, tea is served from empty pots, bread and butter are discussed but never materialised, and the very concept of nourishment becomes another cruel joke. Your body needs approximately 2,000 calories per day to function, along with specific vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. In Wonderland, food exists as concept rather than substance, metaphor rather than matter. You could sit at that tea table forever, going through the motions of eating and drinking while your body slowly starves. The ritual of consumption without the reality of nutrition would kill you as surely as any poison, just more slowly and with the additional psychological torture of thinking you're being fed. The playing card gardeners reveal the true nature of labour in Wonderland. They paint white roses red, not because it serves any practical purpose, but because the Queen demands it, and the penalty for disobedience is death. This is work divorced from meaning, effort expended purely to avoid punishment rather than to achieve any goal or create any value. When you're eventually pressed into service, as all visitors to Wonderland inevitably are, you'll find yourself engaged in similarly meaningless tasks under the constant threat of execution. The psychological impact of forced labour that serves no purpose except to demonstrate your powerlessness would be devastating. Humans need to feel that their efforts matter, that their work contributes to something larger than themselves. Remove that sense of purpose and the mind begins to fragment. The Queen's croquet ground becomes a microcosm of Wonderland's entire approach to rules and fairness. The hoops move around the field at will, the balls have their own agenda, the mallets refuse to cooperate, and through it all you're expected to play as if it were a normal game, while knowing that failure means death. This is more than just a rigged game, it's a perfect metaphor for existence in Wonderland. You're given tasks that are impossible to complete using tools that won't work according to rules that change without notice, or while facing consequences that are completely disproportionate to any possible failure. It's designed to break your spirit long before it breaks your body. The constant references to lessons and schooling throughout Wonderland create another layer of psychological assault. Education in the real world provides structure, builds knowledge progressively, and creates a foundation for understanding increasingly complex concepts. In Wonderland, education becomes a weapon used against comprehension rather than a tool to build it. When the Mock Turtle speaks fondly of his lessons in laughing and grief, when he describes how they had fewer hours each day because they started with 10 hours on the first day, 9 on the second, and so forth, you're not just hearing nonsense. You're witnessing the deliberate destruction of mathematical logic, the corruption of learning itself. Your brain tries to make sense of these educational concepts because that's what brains do. They seek patterns and understanding. But in Wonderland, the act of trying to understand becomes self-destructive. The harder you work to comprehend the lessons being described, the further you drift from rational thought. Education becomes a virus that infects your ability to think clearly. The Duchess's moral lessons follow the same pattern. Everything has a moral in Wonderland, she insists, but the morals she draws from events bear no relationship to the events themselves. Birds of a feather flock together becomes the reason mustard isn't a bird, which somehow connects to the moral that it's love that makes the world go round. The complete disconnection between cause and lesson would drive any rational person to distraction. When authority figures speak with absolute confidence about subjects that make no sense, when they draw conclusions that follow no logical process, when they insist that their nonsense represents deep wisdom, your ability to trust your own judgment begins to erode. You start to doubt your own perceptions, your own reasoning, your own sanity. The Wonderland version of natural history is equally destructive to rational thought. You learn about bread and butterflies, rocking horseflies, and snapdragon flies. These aren't just whimsical inventions, they're systematic corruptions of biological knowledge. Every fact about the natural world that you thought you understood becomes suspect when creatures describe these impossible hybrids with scientific authority. The Mock Turtle's explanation of why they're called lessons, because they lesson from day to day, represents the complete inversion of educational logic. Instead of knowledge building upon itself, creating a foundation for greater understanding, Wonderland's lessons actively reduce comprehension. Each day you know less than the day before until eventually you know nothing at all. This educational assault serves a specific purpose in Wonderland's ecosystem of madness. A person who can't trust their own knowledge, who doubts their own reasoning, who questions their own perceptions, is much easier to control than someone who maintains confidence in their mental faculties. The realm doesn't just want to kill you, it wants to break you down completely before the end comes. The temporal distortions that plague Wonderland extend far beyond the Mad Hatter's frozen tea time. Throughout the realm, cause and effect become disconnected from their normal relationship. Events happen before their causes. Effects precede actions, and consequences arrive before decisions are even made. This isn't just confusing, it's a fundamental assault on human cognition. Your brain is designed to understand sequences, to learn from past events in order to predict future outcomes. When that basic cause and effect relationship breaks down, your ability to learn from experience becomes useless. Every mistake you make teaches you nothing because the relationship between action and consequence has been severed. You're trapped in a realm where experience provides no wisdom and learning becomes impossible. The social hierarchy of Wonderland operates on principles that would be impossible to navigate even if they remained consistent. The Queen outranks everyone, but her authority is based purely on her willingness to execute rather than any legitimate claim to power. The king exists but has no real authority. The court cards have rank but no actual function, and visitors like yourself have no status whatsoever except as potential entertainment for the permanent residents. In this system, survival depends not on following rules or demonstrating competence, but on the whims of creatures who operate according to no comprehensible logic. You can't earn safety through good behavior because the definition of good behavior changes without notice. You can't avoid danger through careful planning because the dangers themselves are unpredictable and arbitrary. The very concept of identity becomes fluid in Wonderland in ways that would be psychologically devastating for any human visitor. The baby that becomes a pig, the cat that appears and disappears, leaving only its grin, the playing cards that are simultaneously objects and people, all of it undermines the basic categories that humans use to understand the world. When the boundaries between human and animal, between object and person, between self and other become permeable, your sense of your own identity begins to dissolve. If a baby can become a pig, what's to stop you from becoming something else entirely? If playing cards can think and feel, what does it mean to be human? If the Cheshire Cat can exist as just a smile, how much of yourself is actually essential to your existence? These aren't just philosophical questions, they're attacks on the psychological foundation of selfhood. Your sense of being a distinct individual with consistent characteristics depends on the stability of identity categories. Remove that stability and the self begins to fragment, piece by piece, until nothing coherent remains. The residents of Wonderland have all undergone this process of identity dissolution. They maintain the appearance of distinct personalities, but closer examination reveals that they're all variations on the same theme of madness. The Mad Hatter, the March Hare, the Queen of Hearts, the Duchess. They all exhibit the same fundamental disconnection from rational thought, the same casual cruelty, the same inability to engage in meaningful communication. This uniformity of madness represents the endpoint of prolonged exposure to Wonderland's influence. Individual personality traits get worn away like stones in a tumbler until all that remains are the sharp edges of insanity. Every visitor follows the same trajectory from confusion to fear to desperation to acceptance to madness. The only variable is how quickly the process completes itself. And through it all, the realm continues its relentless assault on everything that makes survival possible. Logic, pattern recognition, cause and effect, identity, Time, space, authority, justice, education, nourishment, rest, all of it systematically corrupted and destroyed until you're left with nothing but the raw experience of existence without meaning, consciousness without comprehension, life without the tools necessary to sustain it. This is why Wonderland is so much more terrifying than any conventional nightmare. It doesn't just threaten to end your life, it threatens to erase everything that makes life worth living. It offers a form of existence that's technically survival but functionally indistinguishable from the most sophisticated torture ever devised. You remain conscious and aware while everything that makes you human is slowly, methodically, lovingly destroyed. The residents smile and laugh and invite you to join their games because they genuinely can't remember why anyone would want to be anything other than mad. They've forgotten that sanity was ever an option, that logic was ever useful, that meaning was ever possible. And they're eager to help you forget too, because misery doesn't just love company, madness demands it. And they're eager to help too because you forget it. Just love company, madness demands. Eri doesn't. The constant surveillance in Wonderland adds yet another layer of psychological torture that would slowly erode what remains of your sanity. Every creature you encounter seems to be watching, judging, reporting back to some unseen authority. The playing card soldiers patrol constantly, their painted eyes following your every movement. The Cheshire Cat appears without warning to observe your struggles with obvious amusement. Even the flowers in the garden have faces and voices, making privacy impossible anywhere in this twisted realm. This omnipresent observation creates a paranoia that would consume your thoughts entirely. In the real world, humans need spaces where they can let their guard down, where they can process emotions and experiences without fear of judgment or reprisal. Wonderland denies you even this basic psychological necessity. Every tear you shared is witnessed and mocked. Every moment of fear becomes entertainment for creatures who have forgotten what genuine emotion feels like. The architecture of Wonderland itself seems designed to disorient and trap visitors. Corridors that should lead back to where you started instead deposit you in completely different locations. Doors that were open moments ago become solid walls when you need them most. Staircases spiral upward indefinitely, promising escape but delivering only exhaustion and the growing realization that vertical movement means nothing in a realm that operates outside normal geometry. The very concept of shelter becomes meaningless when buildings can reshape themselves without warning. The house you enter for protection might decide to grow smaller while you're inside, crushing you against walls that were spacious moments before. Or it might expand so rapidly that you lose sight of the exits, trapping you in a space that becomes increasingly vast and impossible to navigate. The Duchess's kitchen represents just one example of how domestic spaces become death traps in Wonderland. The excessive pepper creates a chemical fog that would cause severe respiratory damage within hours. Your eyes would water so constantly that you'd become effectively blind. Your throat would swell shut from the irritation. Your lungs would fill with fluid as your respiratory system tries desperately to flush out the toxins. But the cook continues her assault with manic enthusiasm, hurling plates and kitchen implements with deadly accuracy. What should be a place of nourishment and comfort becomes a battlefield where the preparation of food turns into chemical warfare. The normal association between kitchens and safety gets corrupted into another source of mortal danger. The mock turtle and griffin present a different kind of threat through their endless melancholy and nostalgic ramblings. Their constant dwelling on the past creates a temporal trap where visitors become lost in false memories and distorted recollections. They speak with such convincing sadness about experiences that never happened that you begin to doubt your own memory, your own past, your own identity. This isn't just annoying conversation, it's a form of psychological quicksand. The longer you listen to their tales of impossible schools and fictional lessons, the deeper you sink into their distorted reality. Your own memories start to seem unreliable compared to their vivid descriptions of events that contradict everything you know about education, about childhood, about the basic structure of growing up. The Griffin's excitement about meaningless subjects like uglification and derision would be infectious if it weren't so obviously hollow. His enthusiasm for nonsense gradually replaces your ability to distinguish between real knowledge and elaborate fantasy. When someone speaks with genuine passion about subjects that don't exist, your brain starts to question whether your own education was somehow deficient, whether you missed out on crucial lessons that everyone else apparently received. Even the weather in Wonderland operates according to emotional rather than meteorological principles. Rain falls upward when the Queen is particularly angry. Snow appears in summer when the residents feel melancholy. Sunshine becomes scorching when arguments break out, and darkness falls in the middle of day when despair takes hold. This emotional weather system means that the environment itself becomes another source of unpredictable danger. You can't prepare for weather that depends on the psychological state of unstable creatures. One moment you're enjoying pleasant sunshine. The next, you're caught in a torrential downpour of tears because the mock turtle started reminiscing about his school days. The lack of predictable weather patterns makes basic survival planning impossible, while adding another layer of chaos to an already overwhelming environment. And the games and entertainment in Wonderland all follow the same pattern of impossible rules designed to ensure failure. The caucus race, where everyone runs in a circle until they're tired, then stops wherever they happen to be, represents the complete breakdown of competitive structure. When everyone wins and everyone must have prizes, the very concept of achievement becomes meaningless. Your brain needs goals and measurable progress to maintain motivation and mental health. Remove the connection between effort and outcome, and human psychology begins to collapse. The satisfaction that comes from completing tasks, from improving skills, from achieving objectives, all of it disappears in a system where success is arbitrary and failure is impossible because both outcomes mean nothing. The trial proceedings reveal another dimension of Wonderland's systematic cruelty. The court operates with all the trappings of justice, but none of its substance. There are judges, juries, witnesses, and evidence, but the verdict is predetermined, and the sentence is always death. It's a perfect simulation of legal proceedings designed to mock the very concept of fair treatment under law. When you inevitably find yourself in that courtroom facing charges that make no sense for crimes you didn't commit, you'll witness the complete perversion of every principle that makes civilization possible. The presumption of innocence becomes guilt before trial. The right to face your accusers becomes mandatory attendance at your own execution. Due process becomes theatrical performance designed to entertain rather than illuminate. The jury of animals adds another layer of absurdity to proceedings that are already completely divorced from rational jurisprudence. These creatures have no understanding of human law, human behavior, or human rights. They make decisions based on instinct, mood, and the Queen's obvious preferences, rather than any consideration of evidence or justice. When your fate rests in the claws, paws, and talons of creatures who think justice is whatever keeps them from being executed next, you're not receiving a trial. You're participating in an elaborate suicide ritual disguised as legal proceedings. The outcome is never in doubt, but the process must be followed because Wonderland's cruelty is nothing if not systematic. The Queen's Gardeners provide a perfect example of how terror becomes normalized in Wonderland's social system. These playing card soldiers live in constant fear of execution for the most trivial infractions. Planting the wrong colour roses becomes a capital crime. Failing to maintain perfect garden symmetry warrants a death sentence. Their entire existence revolves around avoiding the Queen's arbitrary wrath through increasingly desperate attempts to anticipate her unpredictable desires. This atmosphere of institutionalized terror would be psychologically devastating for any visitor. You'd quickly learn that survival depends not on following consistent rules, but on correctly guessing the momentary whims of an unstable autocrat. The constant fear, the impossible standards, the ever-present threat of instant execution would create a level of stress that would literally rewire your brain chemistry within hours. The physical spaces in Wonderland seem designed to trigger claustrophobia and agoraphobia simultaneously. The rabbit hole that brought you here was impossibly narrow, barely wide enough for your body, creating an immediate sense of confinement and panic. But then you emerge into spaces that are impossibly vast, with no visible boundaries or reference points to help you navigate. This alternation between crushing confinement and terrifying openness would keep your nervous system in a constant state of hyperarousal. Your fight or flight response would be permanently activated, flooding your body with stress hormones that would eventually poison your system. The physical toll of constant panic would weaken your immune system, disrupt your sleep patterns, and make clear thinking impossible. The mirrors and reflective surfaces throughout Wonderland show distorted images that bear no relationship to reality. You might see yourself as the Queen of Hearts, as a playing card, as an animal, or as nothing at all. These distortions aren't just visual tricks, they're attacks on your sense of self-recognition, one of the most fundamental aspects of human consciousness. When you can't trust mirrors to show you your own face, when reflective surfaces become sources of false information about your own existence, your brain's ability to maintain a coherent sense of self begins to fragment. The simple act of looking at your reflection becomes another source of confusion and doubt, rather than a moment of self-confirmation. The constantly changing rules of social interaction in Wonderland would make forming any relationships impossible. Politeness is sometimes required and sometimes punished. Honesty can lead to execution or reward, depending on factors you can't predict or control. Simple questions are treated as profound insults, while obvious insults are received as compliments. Your social instincts, developed over a lifetime of human interaction, become worse than useless in this environment. Every attempt to connect with another being results in confusion, frustration, or active hostility. The isolation that results from this social impossibility would drive most people to madness, even without all the other assaults on their sanity. The food chain in Wonderland operates according to principles that would horrify any visitor with basic moral sensibilities. Babies transform into animals that are then presumably eaten. Playing cards that are obviously sentient beings are treated as disposable objects. The line between person and property shifts constantly, making ethical behavior impossible to navigate. When you can't determine which creatures deserve moral consideration and which are merely objects, when the categories of person and thing become fluid and arbitrary, your entire ethical framework collapses. The moral confusion that results would be just as devastating as the physical dangers you face constantly. The temporal loops scattered throughout Wonderland create pockets of psychological torture disguised as social gatherings. The Mad Hatter's perpetual tea party is just one example of how time distortion becomes a weapon against sanity. Imagine being trapped in the same conversation for hours, days, or years, unable to move forward or escape the repetitive cycle of meaningless words and empty gestures. These temporal prisons don't just waste time, they actively destroy your ability to experience time in a healthy way. Your sense of progress, of growth, of moving toward goals and destinations gets erased by the endless repetition. You lose track of duration, of sequence, of the basic temporal framework that human consciousness requires to function properly. The invitations you receive in Wonderland all lead to events that are designed to humiliate, confuse, or endanger you. Tea parties with no tea, croquet games with impossible rules, trials where you're guilty before charges are even read. Every social gathering becomes another trap, another opportunity for the residents to demonstrate their power over your increasingly fragile psyche. The constant disappointment of false hospitality would wear down your trust and optimism until you become as suspicious and paranoid as the permanent residents. When every invitation is a trick and every gesture of friendship conceals malicious intent, your ability to form human connections gets systematically destroyed. The libraries and sources of information in Wonderland contain only nonsense disguised as knowledge. Books that read themselves, stories that change while you're reading them, reference materials that provide false information with absolute authority. When you desperately need accurate information to understand your situation and plan your survival, you're offered only elaborate lies dressed up as scholarly wisdom. This corruption of information sources would be particularly devastating for anyone trying to learn the rules of Wonderland or find patterns they could use to increase their chances of survival. Every book you consult makes you more confused rather than more informed. Every authority you turn to provides guidance that leads directly into danger. The very act of communication becomes increasingly difficult as your exposure to Wonderland's influence grows. The residents speak in riddles, paradoxes, and nonsense that sounds meaningful until you try to extract actual information from it. Your own speech patterns begin to shift as you unconsciously mimic their style, making it harder for you to think clearly and express your thoughts coherently. Language itself becomes corrupted by Wonderland's influence. Words lose their stable meanings, sentences restructure themselves while you're speaking them, and communication becomes another source of confusion rather than a tool for understanding. When you can't trust words to convey meaning consistently, your ability to reason and plan deteriorates rapidly. The mathematics of Wonderland follow no earthly logic, making any attempt at measurement, calculation, or quantification an exercise in futility. Distances change while you're traveling them. Time moves at variable speeds depending on circumstances you can't predict. Numbers themselves behave according to emotional rather than mathematical principles. When basic arithmetic becomes unreliable, when measurements can't be trusted, when calculations produce impossible results, your ability to understand and navigate your environment collapses completely. The rational thinking that humans depend on for survival becomes not just useless, but actively counterproductive in a realm where logic has been systematically corrupted. The gradual realization that escape is impossible represents perhaps the final psychological blow that would break most visitors completely. The rabbit hole that brought you to Wonderland has vanished. The paths you've travelled don't lead back to where you started. Every route you explore circles back on itself or leads deeper into the realm's dangerous heart. The growing understanding that you're permanently trapped in this nightmare would trigger a despair so profound that it would destroy your will to continue fighting for survival. When hope disappears entirely, when the possibility of return to sanity becomes impossible, most people would simply surrender to the madness rather than continue struggling against forces they can't understand or defeat. And in that moment of surrender, Wonderland would finally claim another victim. Not through violence or transformation, but through the simple expedient of convincing you to stop being human and start being another resident of its beautiful, terrible, impossible realm. The greatest tragedy wouldn't be your death, but your continued existence as something that was once a person but has forgotten why that ever mattered. The residents would welcome you with genuine warmth because they honestly can't remember why anyone would choose sanity over the colourful chaos they've learned to call home. And in time, you wouldn't be able to remember either. The memories of logic, of predictable cause and effect, of meaningful communication and achievable goals would fade like dreams upon waking until all that remained was the eternal present of Wonderland's impossible now. You would become another voice at the tea party, another player in the rigged croquet game, another witness at the predetermined trials, not because you chose madness, but because Wonderland would have systematically destroyed every tool you once possessed for choosing anything else. And the worst part of all would be that by the end you wouldn't mind, you wouldn't even remember that minding was an option. This is the true horror of Wonderland. Not that it kills its visitors, but that it transforms them into something that was never meant to exist. Something that looks human but thinks like a fever dream, speaks like a riddle, and loves like a poison. The perfect residence for a realm where perfect madness is the only form of perfect sense. But even this psychological surrender wouldn't grant you peace, because in Wonderland, madness isn't a destination, it's a process, a continuous, evolving torture that never reaches a stable state. Just when you think you've adapted to the realm's twisted logic, just when you believe you've learned to navigate its impossible rules, everything shifts again. The Queen of Hearts might suddenly decide that red roses are treasonous and only white ones are acceptable. The tea party's eternal 6 o'clock might skip to midnight without warning, plunging the participants into temporal chaos they haven't experienced in centuries. The Cheshire Cat's grin might finally disappear permanently, taking with it the last semi-reliable landmark in a world without fixed reference points. These shifts aren't random. They're deliberate recalibrations designed to prevent any visitor from achieving even the hollow comfort of predictable insanity. Wonderland doesn't want broken residents who found ways to cope with their madness. It wants fresh terror, constant confusion, perpetual suffering disguised as whimsical entertainment. The worst part is that your human brain would never stop trying to find patterns, even after madness had claimed everything else about you. Some deep, primitive part of your consciousness would continue searching for logic, for cause and effect, for rules that made sense. And Wonderland would continue to mock that search with false patterns that crumble the moment you begin to trust them. You might notice that the Queen always executes people on days when the sky is purple, so you learn to avoid her when the heavens take on that particular hue. But then she'll order a beheading under a perfectly normal blue sky, teaching you that your pattern recognition was just another form of wishful thinking. The relief you felt at discovering a reliable rule becomes another source of anguish when that rule proves as arbitrary as everything else. The residents who've been in Wonderland the longest exhibit the same desperate pattern-seeking behaviour. The Mad Hatter checks his watch obsessively even though time has stopped. The March Hare sets places at the tea table according to some internal logic that changes every few minutes. The Queen's gardeners develop elaborate theories about which roses will please her, despite the fact that her preferences shift according to no comprehensible system. They're all still trying to make sense of senselessness, still attempting to find order in chaos, still hoping that somewhere beneath the madness lies a world that operates according to recognizable principles. But hope in Wonderland is just another form of suffering, another way for the realm to extract maximum psychological damage from its victims. The physical environment continues its assault on your senses long after your mind has surrendered to confusion. Colours become more vivid and somehow wrong, like someone adjusted reality's saturation settings beyond what human eyes were meant to process. Sounds arrive before the events that create them, or echo long after their sources have disappeared. The very air seems thick with impossible textures that your skin can feel but your brain can't categorize. Your body begins to betray you in ways that go beyond the dramatic size changes. Your reflection might blink when you don't. Your shadow might move independently of your body. Your voice might start speaking words you didn't choose, carrying on conversations with invisible participants, while you stand helplessly listening to your own vocal cords rebel against your conscious will. The boundaries between your internal experience and the external world begin to dissolve. Your thoughts become visible as butterflies that flutter away before you can catch them. Your emotions manifest as weather patterns that follow you through the realm. Your memories take physical form as playing cards that other creatures can shuffle, rearrange or steal entirely. This externalization of your inner life represents the final stage of Wonderland's conquest. When your thoughts, feelings and memories become objects that others can manipulate, you lose the last refuge of privacy and autonomy that defines human consciousness. You become a transparent being in a world where transparency is just another form of vulnerability. The linguistic corruption spreads through your communication like a virus. You find yourself speaking in riddles without meaning to, asking questions that contain their own contradictory answers, making statements that sound profound but convey no actual information. The clear, direct communication that once connected you to other human beings becomes impossible, as your words twist themselves into Wonderland's preferred patterns of meaningful meaninglessness. When the Duchess insists that everything has a moral, you start hearing morals in your own speech even when you're trying to discuss practical matters. When the caterpillar asks who you are, you discover that you can no longer give a straight answer because the question itself has become infected with Wonderland's tendency to make simple things complicated and complicated things incomprehensible. Your dreams, when sleep becomes possible at all, offer no escape from the realm's influence. Instead of processing the day's experiences in the normal way, your sleeping mind becomes another playground for Wonderland's twisted logic. You dream of being awake, then wake into dreams, then realize you're dreaming about dreaming until the distinction between conscious and unconscious experience disappears entirely. These sleep disturbances compound the psychological damage by removing your brain's natural ability to process and integrate traumatic experiences. Without proper REM sleep, without the normal cycle of memory consolidation and emotional processing that occurs during rest, your mind becomes a collection of unprocessed fragments rather than a coherent consciousness. The nutrition crisis deepens as your body struggles to extract nourishment from substances that may or may not actually be food. The bread at the tea party might fill your stomach but provide no calories. The soup at the Queen's banquet might satisfy your hunger while slowly poisoning your liver. The fruits growing on Wonderland's trees might taste delicious while containing compounds that gradually dissolve your ability to distinguish between flavors. Your metabolism begins to function according to dream logic rather than biological necessity. You might feel satisfied after eating nothing or remain hungry after consuming elaborate feasts. Your body's signals become as unreliable as everything else in this twisted realm, leaving you unable to trust even your basic survival instincts. The social isolation becomes complete as your ability to relate to other beings deteriorates. The residents of Wonderland aren't potential friends or allies. They're fellow victims of a system that has stripped them of everything that once made them relatable. Their madness isn't a shared experience that could create bonds of understanding. It's a unique form of isolation that prevents any genuine connection. When everyone is mad in their own particular way, when each form of insanity follows its own incomprehensible logic, true communication becomes impossible. You're surrounded by creatures who speak the same language but live in completely different realities. The loneliness that results from this false companionship is more devastating than honest solitude would be. The Queen's Court represents the ultimate expression of Wonderland's perverted social order. Here, power flows according to no recognizable hierarchy. Authority changes hands without notice, and the rules of engagement shift faster than anyone can follow. Courtiers bow to the wrong people, address their superiors with inappropriate familiarity, and treat servants with the deference usually reserved for royalty. When you inevitably find yourself participating in court functions, you'll discover that every social interaction is a minefield, where the wrong gesture, the incorrect form of address, or even an unfortunate facial expression can result in immediate execution. The social skills you developed over a lifetime of human interaction become weapons that Wonderland turns against you. The artistic expressions throughout Wonderland follow the same pattern of corrupted beauty that characterizes everything else in the realm. Paintings change while you're looking at them, showing different scenes depending on your mood or the time of day. Music plays backwards or in harmonies that shouldn't be mathematically possible. Poetry rhymes according to emotional rather than phonetic principles. These aesthetic experiences assault your sense of beauty and harmony in the same way that everything else in Wonderland attacks your other fundamental human needs. When art becomes another source of confusion rather than a refuge for contemplation and meaning, you lose one of humanity's most powerful tools for processing difficult experiences and finding purpose in suffering. The economic system of Wonderland operates on principles that would make any attempt at planning or resource management impossible. Currency changes value without warning, sometimes becoming worthless in the middle of transactions. Services are paid for with riddles, jokes, or promises that may or may not be honoured, depending on factors no one can predict or control. When you can't rely on any form of exchange to maintain consistent value, when the very concept of trade becomes another elaborate game with rules that shift constantly, your ability to secure basic necessities through planning and effort disappears entirely. You become dependent on the arbitrary generosity of creatures whose own motivations are incomprehensible. The religious and philosophical systems referenced throughout Wonderland represent perhaps the cruelest assault of all. The realm offers plenty of ceremonies, rituals, and profound-sounding declarations about the nature of existence, but all of them are hollow performances designed to mock humanity's search for meaning and transcendence. The Mock Turtle's sorrowful songs sound like genuine expressions of spiritual longing, until you realize they're elaborate nonsense designed to waste your time and emotional energy. The Duchess's moral pronouncements carry the weight of ancient wisdom until you discover their random combinations of words chosen for their ability to confuse rather than illuminate. When the forms of religion and philosophy persist but their substance has been gutted, when ritual continues but meaning has been stripped away, you're left with the worst possible combination of false hope and genuine despair. The frameworks that might help you find purpose in suffering become additional sources of suffering without purpose. The medical care available in Wonderland follows the same pattern of helpful appearance concealing dangerous reality. Doctors speak with authority about treatments that make conditions worse. Medicine that claims to cure specific ailments instead creates new symptoms that are even more troubling than the original problems. Surgery is performed with playing cards instead of proper instruments. When you inevitably suffer injuries from the realm's constant dangers, when your mind and body break down under the relentless assault of impossible experiences, the help you receive will be worse than no help at all. The false promise of healing becomes another form of torture, another way for Wonderland to extract suffering from hope. The transportation system throughout the realm ensures that every journey becomes an ordeal, regardless of the distance traveled or the urgency of your destination. Paths that should lead to safety instead guide you into greater danger. Vehicles that appear reliable break down in precisely the locations where mechanical failure creates maximum inconvenience and risk. The very act of trying to move purposefully through Wonderland becomes another source of frustration and defeat. When you can't travel from one location to another with any confidence that you'll arrive where you intended to go, when every attempt at navigation leads you further from your goals, your sense of agency and control over your own life evaporates completely. The documentation and record-keeping systems in Wonderland create additional layers of bureaucratic nightmare that would drive any visitor to despair. Important papers disappear when you need them most. Signatures change themselves after you've signed documents. Official stamps and seals rearrange themselves to create different meanings than what was originally intended. When you can't rely on written agreements to maintain their meaning, when contracts rewrite themselves and official documents become unreliable, your ability to protect yourself through legal or formal channels disappears. The civilized alternatives to violence and chaos that make peaceful coexistence possible simply don't exist in any functional form. The educational institutions scattered throughout Wonderland promise learning and growth, but deliver only confusion and regression. Teachers who claim vast knowledge can't answer simple questions. Students who appear eager to learn resist all attempts at actual instruction. Curricula that sound comprehensive turn out to be elaborate wastes of time, disguised as academic achievement. When the promise of education becomes another false hope, when the pursuit of knowledge leads only to greater ignorance, you lose one of humanity's most powerful tools for adapting to challenging environments. The intellectual growth that might help you understand and navigate Wonderland's dangers becomes impossible in a realm where learning is systematically corrupted. The entertainment options available throughout the realm all follow the same pattern of apparent fun concealing actual danger. Games that look enjoyable turn deadly without warning. Performances that seem amusing become psychological torture sessions. Recreational activities that promise relaxation instead create new forms of stress and anxiety. When leisure becomes another source of threat, when the activities that should provide mental and emotional relief instead compound your suffering, you lose the restorative experiences that human consciousness requires to maintain resilience in the face of ongoing challenges. Rest and recreation become impossible in a world where every moment of relaxation is a trap waiting to spring. The technological infrastructure of Wonderland operates according to principles that make modern convenience into ancient curse. Clocks that run backwards or sideways, compasses that point to emotional rather than magnetic directions, scales that weigh intentions instead of mass. Every tool that should make life easier instead makes survival more complicated and unpredictable. When you can't trust instruments to provide accurate information, when the devices that should extend human capability instead undermine human understanding, you're forced to navigate an already impossible world without even the basic tools that civilized life depends upon. Technology becomes another enemy rather than an ally in your struggle to survive. The climate control systems throughout the realm respond to psychological rather than physical factors, creating weather patterns that shift according to the emotional states of creatures whose moods are inherently unstable. Temperature fluctuations that follow no seasonal pattern, precipitation that falls upward when residents feel optimistic, atmospheric pressure changes that respond to the intensity of nearby arguments. When you can't predict or prepare for weather conditions, when the environment itself becomes an extension of the unstable psychology that characterizes all of Wonderland's inhabitants, your ability to find shelter, plan activities, or maintain physical comfort disappears entirely. The basic human need for environmental predictability becomes another impossible dream. The waste management and sanitation systems operate according to dream logic rather than hygienic necessity, creating health hazards that compound all the other dangers you face. Sewers that flow backwards, garbage that reproduces itself, cleaning supplies that make surfaces dirtier instead of cleaner. The basic infrastructure of public health becomes another source of disease and contamination. When cleanliness becomes impossible to achieve or maintain, when the systems designed to protect public health instead threaten individual survival, you're forced to live in conditions that would be considered intolerable in any civilized society. The slow deterioration of hygiene and sanitation creates long-term health consequences that compound the immediate psychological and physical dangers. The emergency response systems throughout Wonderland are designed to create emergencies rather than respond to them. Fire departments that start fires instead of putting them out. Medical personnel who create injuries rather than treating them. Police forces that commit crimes rather than preventing them. Every institution that should provide safety and security instead becomes another source of danger. When the social safety net becomes a trap, when the organizations that should protect citizens instead prey upon them, you're left completely vulnerable in a realm that generates constant threats to your well-being. The collapse of protective institutions leaves you with no recourse when dangers multiply beyond your ability to handle them individually. And through it all, the realm continues its relentless assault on everything that makes human existence bearable. Hope becomes another form of suffering. Knowledge becomes ignorance, safety becomes danger, love becomes manipulation, truth becomes deception. Every positive human experience gets inverted, corrupted, and weaponized against your psychological and physical survival. The residents watch this process with the fascination of children observing an ant farm, occasionally poking the glass to see what happens when the patterns change. They've forgotten that they were once like you, that they once possessed the capacity for rational thought and meaningful emotion. They see your struggles not as tragedy but as entertainment, your suffering not as injustice but as inevitable, and somehow amusing consequence of being human in a realm designed to make humanity impossible. This is the final cruelty of Wonderland. Not that it destroys its visitors, but that it turns them into enthusiastic participants in the destruction of future visitors. The madness becomes infectious not through force, but through the gradual erosion of every alternative to madness. When sanity offers only suffering and insanity promises at least the illusion of joy, the choice becomes inevitable even if it's not really a choice at all. The transformation is so complete, so thorough, so carefully orchestrated that by the time it's finished, you won't remember that there was ever another way to exist. The memories of logic, of predictable cause and effect, of meaningful relationships and achievable goals will fade like childhood dreams until all that remains is the eternal presence of Wonderland's impossible now. And in that moment of complete surrender, when your transformation from human to resident is finally complete, Wonderland will have claimed another victory, not through violence or transformation, but through the simple expedient of making madness seem like the only rational response to an irrational world. The greatest tragedy won't be your death, but your continued existence as something that was once a person, but has forgotten why that ever mattered. The other residents will welcome you with genuine warmth because they honestly can't remember why anyone would choose sanity over the colourful chaos they've learned to call home. And in time, you won't be able to remember either. You'll become another voice at the eternal tea party, another player in the rigged games, another witness at the predetermined trials. Not because you chose madness, but because Wonderland systematically destroyed every tool you once possessed for choosing anything else. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of your transformation is how natural it will feel. The human brain is remarkably adaptable, evolved to find normalcy even in the most abnormal circumstances. After weeks of constant size changes, your body will stop fighting the transformations. Your nervous system will adapt to the impossible physics. Your consciousness will learn to accept contradiction as a fundamental principle of existence. The residents will notice when this shift occurs. They'll see the moment when you stop flinching at paradoxes, when you begin to smile at the Queen's death threats, when you start to find genuine humour in the Mad Hatter's circular conversations. This isn't healing or acceptance in any meaningful sense. It's the final surrender of your human cognitive architecture to Wonderland's demands. Your speech patterns will change first. You'll catch yourself speaking in riddles without realizing it. Simple questions will become elaborate philosophical puzzles. Direct statements will transform into layered metaphors that mean nothing and everything simultaneously. The clear communication that once connected you to other minds will become another casualty of the realm's influence. The physical changes follow close behind the linguistic ones. Your posture shifts to accommodate constant uncertainty. Your facial expressions settle into the same vacant smile that characterizes all long-term residents. Your movements become fluid in ways that suggest your bones and joints have forgotten their original limitations. You're still recognizably human, but only in the way that a painting of a person resembles the living original. The mock turtle and Gryphon will become your closest companions during this transitional period. They understand the melancholy that accompanies the loss of linear time, the strange grief that comes from forgetting what logic felt like. Their endless reminiscences about impossible schools and fictional lessons will start to resonate with your own confused memories of a world that operated according to rules. You'll find yourself contributing to their conversations, adding details about lessons in reeling and writhing that feel more real than your actual education. The Mock Turtle's sorrowful songs will move you to tears that you can't explain. The Gryphon's excitement about meaningless subjects will become infectious until you're genuinely enthusiastic about uglification and derision. These creatures will teach you the art of nostalgic sadness for experiences that never happened. They'll show you how to mourn for a past that existed only in the collective imagination of Wonderland's residents. This false nostalgia becomes a substitute for the genuine memories that the realm has systematically corrupted and destroyed. The Queen's Court will eventually summon you for your final examination. Not a trial for crimes you've committed, but an assessment of your readiness to abandon the last vestiges of human reasoning. You'll stand before the tribunal of playing cards and animals, facing questions that have no correct answers and accusations that make no logical sense. But by this point, you won't be looking for logic anymore. The questions will seem perfectly reasonable. The accusations will feel justified even though you can't remember committing the alleged offences. When the Queen sentences you to death, you'll nod politely and thank her for her consideration, because death in Wonderland is just another form of transformation, and transformation has become your natural state. The execution will never actually occur, of course. The Queen's executioners will discover that you can't be killed because you've already ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. You've become a concept rather than a person. An idea rather than an individual. The axe will pass through your neck without leaving a mark, and the Queen will declare this proof of your complete assimilation into her realm. Your new existence will settle into patterns that feel comfortingly familiar despite being utterly alien to everything you once understood about life. You'll attend the Mad Hatter's Tea Party every day at 6 o'clock, participating in conversations that repeat themselves with variations so subtle that you'll never notice the repetition. Time will become a circle rather than a line, and you'll find this circular existence more satisfying than linear progression ever was. The croquet games will become your favorite recreation. You'll master the art of playing with living equipment, learning to anticipate the hedgehog's movements and work with the flamingo's natural tendencies rather than against them. Your skill at the impossible game will earn the Queen's approval, and her approval will feel more valuable than any achievement from your previous existence. You'll develop expertise in subjects that don't exist, becoming a recognized authority on the mathematics of impossible numbers and the philosophy of meaningful nonsense. Other residents will seek your advice on problems that have no solutions, and you'll provide guidance that helps no one while satisfying everyone. Your wisdom will be profound precisely because it means nothing. The Cheshire Cat will become your confidant, the one creature in Wonderland who remembers what you were before your transformation. He'll appear and disappear around you with increasing frequency, his grin serving as a constant reminder that madness was always a choice, even when it felt inevitable. His presence will comfort you in ways you can't articulate because he represents the bridge between what you were and what you've become. Your reflection in Wonderland's mirrors will stabilize into something that looks like you but moves independently. You'll have conversations with this other self, discussing the philosophical implications of existence in a realm where identity is fluid and consciousness is collective. These dialogues will feel more meaningful than any conversation you ever had with another person, because your reflection understands you in ways that no one else can. The flowers in the Queen's garden will begin to recognize you as a permanent resident. They'll nod when you pass, whisper gossip about the other courtiers, and offer commentary on the daily executions that never quite result in actual death. You'll find their company more satisfying than human interaction ever was, because plants in Wonderland don't expect consistency or logic from their conversations. Your dreams, when you occasionally sleep, will become indistinguishable from your waking experiences. You'll dream of being awake in the real world, then wake into dreams of being asleep in Wonderland, until the distinction between conscious and unconscious experience disappears entirely. This dissolution of the sleep-wake boundary will feel like a liberation rather than a loss, because boundaries were always arbitrary anyway. The White Rabbit will eventually stop running past you in a panic. Instead, he'll slow down to chat about the weather, the Queen's mood, and the eternal difficulty of keeping proper time in a realm where time refuses to cooperate. His conversations will be as hurried and anxious as ever, but you'll understand that his anxiety is a choice rather than a compulsion, a performance rather than a genuine emotion. You'll learn to paint roses with the playing card gardeners, developing techniques for changing white flowers to red that go far beyond simple pigment application. The art becomes metaphysical, involving the transformation of essential properties rather than surface appearances. Your skill at this impossible task will earn respect from creatures who once viewed you as an amusing, temporary visitor. The Duchess will invite you to her kitchen for advanced lessons in moral extraction. You'll learn to find profound ethical teachings in the most mundane events, to derive universal principles from specific absurdities, to speak wisdom that sounds meaningful while conveying no practical information. These skills will feel more valuable than any education you received in the world beyond the rabbit hole. Your handwriting will change to match the flowing script used throughout Wonderland for official documents and personal correspondence. The letters will curve and spiral in ways that make reading an adventure rather than a simple information transfer. You'll write poetry without meaning to, creating verses that rhyme according to emotional rather than phonetic principles. The tea at the Mad Hatter's party will finally begin to taste like something, though you'll never be able to describe what that something is. The empty cups will feel substantial in your hands. The non-existent food will satisfy hungers you didn't know you possessed. The impossible feast will nourish parts of your being that regular meals never reached. Your voice will develop the musical quality that characterizes all Wonderland speech. Words will flow with rhythms that make conversation feel like collaborative performance art. You'll discover that you can sing without opening your mouth, that your thoughts themselves carry melodies that other residents can hear and appreciate. The playing cards will begin to deal you into their games, recognizing you as a fellow member of the court rather than an outside observer. You'll learn the rules of card games that change while you're playing them, developing strategies for competitions where winning and losing are equally arbitrary. Your participation will feel more engaging than any sport or activity from your previous existence. The seasons in Wonderland will start to make emotional sense to you. Winter will arrive when collective sadness reaches a certain threshold. Spring will emerge from communal hope regardless of the calendar. Summer will burn with the intensity of shared passion. Autumn will fall when nostalgia becomes too heavy to bear. You'll find this emotional weather more predictable than the meteorological patterns you once relied upon. Your footsteps will begin to leave different impressions depending on your mood and intentions. Happy thoughts will create flower patterns in your wake. Sad reflections will leave puddles that reflect memories instead of faces. Angry steps will crack the ground in ways that spell out the sources of your frustration. The earth itself will become responsive to your inner state. The boundaries between yourself and other residents will blur in ways that feel natural rather than frightening. You'll experience the Queen's moods as if they were your own emotions. The Mad Hatter's thoughts will echo in your mind. The Cheshire Cat's disappearances will leave gaps in your own consciousness that feel comfortable rather than disturbing. Time will lose its tyrannical hold over your existence. Past, present, and future will become suggestions rather than fixed categories. You'll remember things that haven't happened yet and anticipate events that occurred before you arrived. The linear progression that once organized your experiences will give way to a temporal spiral that allows you to visit any moment from any direction. Your shadow will develop its own personality, sometimes acting independently of your movements, occasionally engaging in separate conversations with the shadows of other residents. You'll find this shadow self more honest and reliable than your conscious mind, because shadows in Wonderland can't lie even when their owners have forgotten the difference between truth and fiction. The mathematical principles governing Wonderland will become as natural to you as addition and subtraction once were. You'll understand why sometimes 2 + 2 = 5, and other times it equals purple. The arithmetic of impossibility will feel more logical than the rigid calculations that once constrained your thinking. Your reflection will age backwards on Tuesdays and sideways on weekends, following temporal patterns that make perfect sense within Wonderland's system of chronological flexibility. You'll watch yourself grow younger and older simultaneously, experiencing the full spectrum of potential ages as a form of entertainment rather than existential crisis. The Queen's roses will begin growing in colours that don't exist in any earthly spectrum, hues that you can see perfectly but could never describe to someone from the outside world. These impossible colours will become your favourites, more beautiful than any shade you ever admired in your previous existence. And finally, one day that isn't really a day in any temporal sense you once understood. You'll realise that you can no longer remember why anyone would want to leave Wonderland. The thought of returning to a world governed by logic, constrained by physics, limited by the possible, will seem not just unappealing but genuinely incomprehensible. The other residents will notice this final transformation with satisfaction, but not surprise. They've been waiting for you to complete your journey from visitor to inhabitant, from human to something infinitely more flexible and content. They'll welcome you with the same warmth they show all graduates of Wonderland's curriculum in Advanced Impossibility. You'll take your place among them with gratitude for the education you never knew you needed, for the freedom from reason you never realized you wanted, for the peace that comes from surrendering the exhausting effort of trying to make sense of existence. The struggle to maintain human consciousness in an inhuman world will seem like a painful memory from someone else's life. And in the end, you'll understand that Wonderland was never trying to kill you. It was trying to save you from the prison of logic, the tyranny of cause and effect, the limited possibilities of a world constrained by rules. Your death would have been a tragedy. Your transformation into something better than human is Wonderland's greatest gift. The rabbit hole still exists somewhere, leading back to that other world with its rigid physics and predictable consequences. But you'll never look for it because you'll finally understand that falling down was never an accident. It was an invitation to a better form of existence, and you were wise enough to accept it. Enough to accept it. The transformation isn't just psychological, it's biological in the most terrifying way imaginable. Your DNA itself begins to rewrite according to Wonderland's preferences, rather than evolutionary logic. Your cells start dividing in patterns that follow emotional mathematics instead of biological necessity. Your organs rearrange themselves to accommodate the impossible demands of existing in a realm where function follows whimsy rather than survival. Your heart develops chambers that pump wonder instead of blood. Your lungs learn to breathe in paradoxes and exhale certainties. Your brain grows new lobes designed specifically for processing contradictory information simultaneously. These aren't improvements or adaptations, they're corruptions of everything that once made your body a reliable vessel for consciousness. The digestive system becomes particularly nightmarish as it learns to extract nourishment from concepts rather than calories. You'll find yourself genuinely satisfied after eating the idea of a sandwich, properly hydrated after drinking the suggestion of water. Your stomach will rumble with philosophical hunger that can only be satisfied by consuming abstract thoughts disguised as afternoon tea. Meanwhile, your skeletal structure begins to adopt the fluid properties necessary for constant transformation. Bones that were once rigid become suggestions. Joints that once had limitations become possibilities. Your spine learns to curve in directions that don't exist in normal geometry, allowing you to literally bend over backwards through dimensions that have no names. The nervous system undergoes the most radical transformation of all. Neural pathways that once carried electrical impulses now transport riddles. Synapses that once fired in predictable patterns begin to spark according to rhyme schemes. Your brain's attempt to process information becomes a form of poetry that sounds beautiful, but means nothing coherent. Memory storage shifts from chronological filing to emotional categorization. Instead of remembering when things happened, you remember how they felt. Instead of recalling facts, you recall impressions. Instead of learning from experience, you learn from the spaces between experiences where meaning traditionally lived, but no longer bothers to visit. Your sensory organs develop capabilities that would be miraculous if they weren't so obviously wrong. Eyes that can see around corners but not straight ahead. Ears that hear colours but miss conversations. A nose that smells emotions but can't detect actual sense. Skin that feels the weight of glances but goes numb to physical touch. The circulatory system begins pumping liquid starlight instead of blood, creating a luminescence that makes you glow with the same ethereal light that illuminates all of Wonderland's permanent fixtures. This isn't beautiful or mystical. It's the visible evidence that your body has surrendered its claim to biological reality and accepted its new role as a living metaphor. Your vocal cords restructure themselves to produce sounds that exist in the spaces between notes, melodies that can only be heard by creatures whose hearing has been similarly corrupted. When you speak, flowers bloom from your words. When you sing, geometry bends to accommodate harmonies that shouldn't be mathematically possible. The transformation of your hands might be the cruelest change of all. Fingers that once provided precise motor control become instruments for gesturing at meanings that drift away before they can be grasped. Palms that once offered comfort through touch now leave impressions of questions on everything they encounter. The simple human ability to hold and be held disappears beneath layers of symbolic significance. So there you have it. Wonderland isn't the charming fairy tale destination that Lewis Carroll painted for children's bedtime stories. It's a psychological meat grinder disguised as whimsy. A realm where madness isn't just inevitable. It's the only possible outcome for anyone unlucky enough to tumble down that rabbit hole. From the moment you fall to the second you surrender your humanity, every element of this twisted world conspires to break you down, rebuild you, and transform you into something that was never meant to exist. The next time someone mentions Alice's adventures, remember this. She didn't survive Wonderland. Wonderland survived her. She didn't survive Wonderland. Wonderland survived her.